Welcome to the Old Dominion EMS Alliance's Field Preceptor Orientation. This project was a collaborative effort of the hospitals, EMS agencies, and educational programs in the Odemsa region.
In the next few minutes, we hope to orient field providers to the requirements and expectations associated with being a field preceptor for EMS students in the Odemsa region. Preceptors allow EMS students the opportunity to learn and practice in the field setting while going through school. It is the responsibility of the field preceptor to provide a quality, guided field experience for the student. This training will cover the following components of the Odemsa EMS Student Field Precepting Program. Preceptor roles and requirements, student responsibilities, adult learning principles, shift structure, and components, student phase progression, and evaluating students. All of these components come together to achieve the ultimate goal of EMS programs.
The goal of EMS education programs is to prepare entry-level competent providers in the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domains. These three domains are equally important, and students must demonstrate competency in all. Using consistent tools, we will objectively evaluate the student's knowledge, skill, and professional behavior as entry-level providers. We do not expect perfection. Students should not expect, nor should they receive high scores at the beginning of their clinical and field experiences. We are looking for a documented progress toward competency throughout the program.
A preceptor is not the primary instructor. Unlike what you may do as a field training officer, student preceptors are not here just to evaluate competency. The preceptor's role is to develop students by setting a good example, objectively evaluating, and providing constructive feedback. This process helps the student connect the classroom to the real-world environment of the field. The Training and Education Committee at Odemsa has established the following requirements for preceptors. Consistent with state regulations, preceptors must be certified at or above the level of the student's program. In the hospital environment, regulation requires the preceptor to be at least an RN, MD, DO, NP, or PA. EMS providers working in the hospital setting may also precept, provided the provider is at or above the student's program level. With Office of EMS approval, other specialty providers may be authorized to precept students. However, lower-level healthcare providers, such as LPNs or CNs, may not precept EMS providers at any level. Preceptors must be cleared providers for at least 1 year, and be in good standing with the clinical site. Preceptors must be competent and confident, have good communication skills, and able to create a positive learning environment. Remember that you are considered an extension of program faculty. Additionally, it is important to note that there are federal laws that protect student information and require clinical sites to protect students against harassment and abuse. Be professional, and set an example.
EMS students must always be directly supervised to ensure safe practices and appropriate learning. The goal is to provide the proper example, encouragement, demonstration and redirection as necessary. Fairly, impartially, objectively, and constructively assess the student and provide feedback. Objective criteria are defined for all grading categories, and it is important for the preceptor to evaluate the student with those criteria in mind.
Preceptors should continually provide feedback and recognition, assist the student in developing a plan of action for improvement, and communicate concerns in a timely manner to the agency representative. There is more than one way to do things, so be careful not to demand that students do everything like you would do them. Effective preceptors will help the student shape his or her own style in areas where there is not a specific and science-based way of doing things. Preceptors must be able to understand the difference between principles and preferences.
Preceptors are required to oversee all aspects of the student's performance. Remember that the point at which to step in and help can be different for various students at different points within their educational journey. Ultimately, the preceptor wants to see the student providing high-quality care for the patient. This means the student performs an adequate assessment, understands the pathophysiology involved in the patient's condition, develops a differential diagnosis from which he or she can develop a treatment plan from various care options, and thinks critically about the care being provided. Preceptors must have a solid foundation in the standard of care, agency protocols, standing orders, and other applicable guidelines that apply to all aspects of emergency field care of the sick and injured. Every clinical rotation should begin with a clear discussion on the expectations for the student and preceptor. Preceptors should find out where the student is in the program, and discuss reasonable expectations for the shift. The student should have a syllabus and/or list of objectives for their rotations. Review the student's permitted skills based on the school's established documentation method. Ask the student to review past documentation, if time permits. Then, provide a tour of the facility, equipment, and organizational practices that may be important.
Some programs will use a punch card ID system to identify the skills permitted by the student at a particular level in the program.
Other schools may use a signature form indicating permitted skills. Do not permit students to perform skills that have not been approved by the instructor. Students using Platinum Planner can run a real-time report indicating skills that are permitted. Skills that have a lock are not yet authorized for the clinical environment, and should not be permitted.
Remember that the clinical experience is an ongoing conversation. Students should not be expected to run the calls on the first clinical rotation. Give directions as appropriate for the student's level in the program, and adjust the student's role as the student gains confidence. As a preceptor, you should be discussing the patient's circumstances and care with the student even before patient contact is established. From the time of dispatch, the student should be formulating potential differential diagnoses that may be possible, given the dispatch information, plus some focused questions that may be pertinent to ask to either support or rule out those different diagnoses. Once on scene, the student should develop a general impression of the patient. An adequate history should also be obtained, along with a set of vitals and a physical assessment. With this information, the student should then be able to refine his or her differential diagnosis and develop a treatment plan based upon that diagnosis. Once treatment is initiated, it is of vital importance for the student to reassess the patient, obtain another set of vital signs, and gauge whether or not the implemented treatment plan is working, or if other alternatives should be considered. Additional information, including any pertinent positive and negative examination findings, should be documented.
Adult learners will feel the need to take responsibility. It is important for them to have control over their learning. They will regularly perform self-assessments, and will expect a peer relationship with the instructor, multiple options and initial, yet subtle support. Adult learners may resist change, and will want to know a reason for the change. They resent theory-based actions, and want practical knowledge that will help them achieve their goals and build confidence. They want information to be relevant and applicable to their tasks. They appreciate discussion and sharing of knowledge. They will seek greater depth, not just memorization. Learning for this group is usually voluntary, and they look for ways to escape from routine learning to challenge different parts of their brains. They enjoy new challenge, personal enhancements, and new relationships. It is also important to note that adults are generally juggling work, family, school and personal lives, and may need more flexibility. Adult learners want to be taught useful information and they will have expectations of immediate results. They understand that the opportunities they enjoy also cost them time and money. The Dreyfus model is an educational theory that applies well to EMS. The novice provider is where we expect students to be at the beginning of their educational programs and clinical experiences. They will require a lot of prompting and direction, and will need to see how you do things. Students should never be thrown to the wolves on their first clinical shift, but should be allowed to observe, participate, and gradually grow through the levels. Advanced beginners understand their individual skills, but are still working on putting them together in context. They understand limitations, and may seek permission before making decisions. Competent providers are still very systematic, and may rely on resources, online medical control, and peers. However, they can make decisions, and do not need prompting for patient care. They know what is important information for the task at hand, and can function as a team leader. This is the goal of an EMS educational program. Proficient providers make excellent preceptors. They are comfortable with the environment and complex patient cases, but still use some resources and can explain why they do what they do. They also remember what it was like to be a student. Expert providers are often not the best preceptors, contrary to popular belief. Unless these providers have been teaching throughout their careers, They may have forgotten many of the systematic approaches to assessment and patient care, often relying on gut instinct rather than systematic processes. These providers can be hard for a student to follow, and may become frustrated with a student's lack of progress. No student will be expected to achieve proficient or expert levels during an educational program. The goal of any program is to achieve entry-level competency at the designated program level.
We encourage preceptors to employ multiple educational approaches when working with students. Faculty of the programs may be able to provide some insight if you are having challenges making progress, but you may try some of these approaches. Guided learning allows the student to combine sequences of skills with direction, preventing bad habits. Allow the student to perform skills, only interjecting when needed, then return to observation mode. Consider both verbal and nonverbal cues to prevent embarrassing students or breaking confidence. Consider asking the students about their learning styles, so you can adapt your teaching style to help them succeed. Ultimately, our goal is to produce the kind of provider with whom you would be proud to work with in the future. After all, it may just happen. Part of providing quality patient care is having mastery of technical skills associated with the practice of emergency medicine. Preceptors must have mastery of their own skills to effectively guide and direct students in the performance of their skills. Preceptors will need to assist students not only with the performance of skills, but troubleshooting and improving those skills in light of unsuccessful attempts or somewhat marginal successes. It is of vital importance that all attempts are properly documented, and that students are awarded credit only when skills are performed successfully. Ultimately, Odemsa expects preceptors in the region to be active participants in EMS student learning. The information, skills, and guidance you provide will have a direct impact on the lives of others, including the student as well as the lives he or she will eventually touch. Challenge the student, be supportive, answer questions, provide a positive learning experience for the student, and have some fun. Enjoy your time serving as a mentor for the student. Students are not permitted to leave early without permission from both the preceptor and the instructor. When the student leaves a clinical site, all paperwork should be completed, and evaluations should be submitted. There should be a clear discussion at the beginning of the shift regarding expectations, and a clear discussion of the student's performance at the end of the shift. EMS students are informed that clinical sites may dismiss them from a clinical experience for any legal, non-prohibited reason. It is recognized that inappropriate behavior or an unprofessional attitude may be grounds for such a dismissal. If a dismissal does occur, the EMS agency representative should be notified as soon as possible with details pertaining to the dismissal.
Team leads are a capstone skill performed by paramedic students after all other components of the program are completed. According to the National Registry and the Committee on Accreditation, the student has successfully led the team if he or she has conducted a comprehensive assessment, not necessarily performed the entire interview or physical exam, but rather been in charge of the assessment, as well as formulated and implemented a treatment plan for the patient. This means that most, if not all, of the decisions have been made by the student, especially formulating a field impression, directing the treatment, determining patient acuity, disposition and packaging and moving the patient, if applicable. Minimal to no prompting was needed by the preceptor. No action was initiated or performed that endangered the physical or psychological safety of the patient, bystanders, first responders or a crew. Team leads should be a capstone component and should provide the field preceptor and the program faculty the opportunity to adequately evaluate the competency of the soon-to-be graduate. Team leads must take place in a 911 system on a transport-capable ambulance. While not every team lead requires the patient to be transported, a comprehensive assessment, differential diagnosis, and treatment plan must be completed by the student. For example, routine rehab of firefighters on a structure fire scene will not be considered a team lead. Team leads also may not be transports between facilities, unless the transport is from a lower level of care to a higher level of care in an emergency setting. For example, a small, rural hospital may transfer a critical patient to a trauma center, which would count as a team lead, while transporting a patient from the hospital to a nursing home does not. Students are not always performing team leads during field rotations. Students may attend field experience rotations early in the program, functioning as a team member. The capstone internship is mandated by the accrediting agency and National Registry as a capstone component, after all other items are complete. Sequencing is an important component of the National Registry Psychomotor Competency Portfolio, and is clearly defined in the Committee on Accreditation's Appendix G.
When students participate in clinical and field experiences, there are several forms that must be completed fully and appropriately at the end of each field shift or experience. It is not acceptable for students or preceptors to complete these forms retroactively at a date or time beyond the end of the field shift. When evaluating student performance, be sure you understand the student's stage of development. Students in the formative phases will serve as team members, taking direction and gradually learning to take over patient care. In the summative phases, preceptors should be strictly evaluating student performance as competent, entry-level providers.
Students are evaluated on the 3 learning domains recognized by Bloom's taxonomy: cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. This evaluation component is very important to assist the student in his or her improvement in all aspects of providing emergency care. Fair, objective scoring is of paramount importance. If the preceptor does not have enough observational experience with the student to grade within a particular category, that respective category should be graded by the preceptor as N.A. A narrative section exists for additional preceptor comments. Preceptors should ensure that any included comments are objective in nature and relate directly to the student's performance during the field experience. These comments are utilized by the student's instructors to assist in the student's continued development. The comments should help reinforce positive behaviors and performance, while also constructively identifying shortcomings and areas for development and improvement. Once the student's self-evaluation is completed and the preceptor also completes his or her evaluation of the student, the preceptor and the student should have a discussion regarding the field experience and the scoring of the student's performance. If there are discrepancies between the student's self-assessment and the preceptor's assessment, those discrepancies should be discussed.
Documentation must be completed throughout the clinical rotation, and approved at the end of the rotation. Preceptors should not sign off on records after the student leaves. In the event of extenuating circumstances, preceptors must contact the clinical instructor immediately with a plan to complete the evaluations. Preceptors are responsible for verifying that all skills documented by the students were performed under direct supervision. Preceptors may not verify student skills or documentation for shifts that were not scheduled specifically as student rotations. Functioning in a student capacity while serving in an employee role on unit is a violation of Virginia EMS regulations and national accreditation standards.
Documentation should not be considered confidential. As a preceptor, you should be comfortable discussing your evaluations with the student. This will assure that documentation is consistent, and that the student has a chance to learn from your feedback throughout the shift and for each subsequent shift. The student experience is not simply a testing process. It is an opportunity to grow and learn from your experience and direction. The student will need your feedback. In the event that you feel you cannot discuss an issue with the student, please document honestly, and follow up with correspondence with the clinical instructor or program director.
While it is understood that some supervision of skills may be delegated to other qualified members of the crew, the primary preceptor must be credentialed at or above the level of the student's program. For example, EMT students may be precepted in the field by EMT, advanced TMT or paramedic level providers. Paramedic students may only be precepted in the field by paramedics. In the hospital environment, all preceptors must be RN, NP, PA, MD or DO, if not holding an EMS certification at or above the level of the student's program. Some specialty areas, such as respiratory therapy, may allow other credentials, as specifically approved by the Virginia Office of Emergency Medical Services, i.e., respiratory therapist. Please note this when completing student documentation. Programs are required to verify the credentials and qualification of preceptors. EMT programs may be accredited or non-accredited, and documentation methods may vary. The Virginia Office of EMS has standardized forms for clinical rotations, but programs may use different documentation methods, provided they have the minimal information required by the Office of EMS. Preceptors should verify the date and time of the clinical rotation, and the number of patient assessments reported by the student. Be careful to draw a line through any blank spaces that would potentially permit students to add additional patients. Preceptors must complete any evaluation forms, as required by the program. Remember that the goal of EMS educational programs is entry-level competency according to national scope of practice, not mastery of your local or regional system.
The form pictured here is the state-approved TR-05A form issued by the Office of EMS. Programs are not required to use this form, but must use a form that contains the same information. The student's program instructor will review and sign the narrative form, but the preceptor should verify all student contacts. This form, TR05, is a clinical training record. You will notice this form has 10 lines. Each patient contact should be documented on this form, and a corresponding TR05A form must accompany each patient listed. The preceptor verifies that each patient was assessed at the location, time, and date listed. Additional forms may be used, as required by the program. Program may use electronic systems to track patient contacts, provided the minimum information listed is included in the system. Preceptors must verify the patient contacts, regardless of the method used.
Advanced EMT programs are accredited by the Virginia Office of EMS. Documentation requirements are similar to those of paramedic programs, though the forms may vary. Program documentation must be secured, and must verify competency in the cognitive, psychomotor and affective domains. Paramedic programs must be nationally accredited by the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs, and must meet all requirements of the Virginia Office of EMS and National Registry of EMTs. Documentation requires specific items, either via paper forms or electronic. However, the National Registry's 2016 Paramedic Psychomotor Competency Portfolio Manual requires that the method of submission must be secure, preventing students from discarding or altering unsuccessful documentation. Pictured here is the form template issued by the NREMT Portfolio Manual. It contains the minimum information required for all clinical rotations. Do not sign forms without all information completed. You are certifying the accuracy of this documentation. Preceptors should assure that any spaces not used are crossed out so that students cannot add patients after the documentation is complete. After the student's self-evaluation, you should discuss your evaluation with the student after each patient contact. Note the score of 0 equals unsuccessful, a score of 1 equals marginal, which is not acceptable at the end, but would be a normal expectation in the early stages of the program. By the end of the program, students should be performing at 2, which is entry-level competency. It is important to note that during the final internship, a student may not document a successful team lead if the preceptor's rating is less than 2. Preceptors should discuss the performance with the student to assure that the documentation is consistent with your evaluation. The statement here is from page 15 of the NREMT Portfolio Manual. It is important to assure security of the documentation. This statement is the reason most programs have transitioned to electronic documentation systems, which require students to submit and lock the documentation after preceptors have evaluated the student. Any method that allows the student to alter or destroy documents after the preceptor has completed it is in violation of these standards. Documentation in Ptap is completed through the student's account. Select the Shifts tab, then choose Skills in Patient Care. You will notice in the preceptor sign-off column in the middle of the screen that some shifts have not been signed off. Click on the icon to complete the preceptor evaluations. Once you have accessed the shift documentation, you will see a summary of the shift, circled in red. You can click this link to review all of the information submitted by the student. By signing this document, you are certifying that the student actually submitted accurate information. After reviewing this documentation, scroll to the bottom of the report to complete any necessary evaluation forms. With each form, select the preceptor role as the evaluator, then select your clinical or field site, then choose your name from the list of preceptors. After completing the form, click Confirm to lock the form. You will need a username and password to verify this information if the school uses this validation process. Note, however, that the forms remain editable until the shift documentation has been locked. After all evaluations have been completed, click the detailed shift report link at the top of the page. Here, you can review the summarized information and download a PDF of the documentation, if desired. Then, click the Sign Off on this shift link at the top of the page. The student should summarize the patient information on this page. This can be copied and pasted into the text field. The preceptor should add notes under the Plan of Action section. You may then enter a username and password, or signature. Always click the Lock Patient Care/Narrative Documentation for this shift checkbox to assure that documentation cannot be changed after you approve it. If using physical signature, the program should have a record of this signature on file for verification.
When using Platinum Planner to approve student documentation, all preceptors must have a preceptor account. This assures secure documentation submission and compliance with National Registry's portfolio, and provides you the convenience of reviewing past documentation you have approved. When a student begins a shift, he or she will enter your information into the info section. This section contains a drop-down menu of preceptors associated with the student's current class. Students should first search this menu for your name. If your name is not available, the student selects New, and enters your email address. Please use your official agency email address, to aid in verification. If you do not have a company email address, your personal account must be verified before the documentation can be approved. Please check the email account as the student enters it, as you will need to verify your account before you can complete the documentation. Again, please set this up at the beginning of the shift, to assure that any problems can be corrected before the end of your shift. We want you to be able to go home on time. The system will search for accounts associated with your email address, to prevent duplicate accounts. Once you have activated your account from the link sent to your email account, you will be able to log in at www.platinumplanner.com. Your username is your email address. If you forget your password, simply click the Forgot Password link to reset via email. Once logged in, you will be taken to the Platinum dashboard. If you have multiple roles, they will all be listed here. You can also scroll to the bottom of the page to see any news associated with the website. This includes any new features or changes. It is a good idea to briefly look over this periodically. Updates are published each Sunday morning at 4 a.m. From the Platinum Planner column on the right, choose the Preceptor role. In the Preceptor role, you will see a notice for any documentation pending your approval. You can also select the Opportunities tab at the top menu. You will also note at the bottom of the page, any status updates for your account. You can see here that the preceptor's credentials and organizational affiliation have been verified by the school, and that the preceptor has completed the online training. You are doing that now. If you see a notice that you have not completed the training, click the link to submit the certificate. Preceptor training is required for unit leaders in the hospital setting, and for all field preceptors. In the final paramedic internship, students will not be able to select preceptors who have not completed the training, and will not be able to create new preceptor accounts. Training is not required for every hospital preceptor, as long as one trained person is in the unit while students are present. From this screen, you can see students assigned to you in the Upcoming tab, students currently on shift in the Students Documenting tab, and any documentation pending review under the Ready to Review tab. If documentation is returned to you, this will be under the Returned tab. To see a history of all students you have precepted, click the Completed tab. Next to the search menu, you will see a settings icon, where you can customize the columns on this page for easier sorting. If you encounter major problems with a student, you can click the flag link to disable the student's access. This should only be used for egregious situations in which the student should not be able to do any clinical or lab documentation without immediate intervention from the program director and medical director. For now, we will click the complete link to review the student's paperwork. On this screen, much like completing your documentation in FieldBridge or other patient care reporting systems, you will notice tabs down the side, as well as those across the top. On the menu on the left, you will start with the Review tab, and review the student's shift information. Verify that the actual hours are correct. You will see the shift history log, indicating any edits to documentation and its review status. There is also a Sentinel Events button on the top right of the screen, where you can click to notify program administration, faculty and medical director immediately of significant events during the shift. These could be student injuries or potentially traumatic events, such as vehicle accidents, critical calls. Certain call types will be automatically flagged for review, such as cardiac arrests and gunshot wounds. Program faculty follow up on these situations immediately, and provide peer support or other interventions, as needed. After reviewing all information on this page, click the Forms tab in the menu on the left. On this page, you will notice the red icon, indicating that these forms have not been completed. Some forms are required for each attempt, such as team leads. Click the drop-down arrow to see which forms have not yet been completed. Click Fill Out Form to add a form. When all required forms are completed, you will see a green check mark. On the Preceptor Clinical Shift Evaluation, click Edit to add information about each patient. When all forms are complete, click the Documents tab. On the Documents tab, you can review any files uploaded by the student, and you can also upload any documents you feel appropriate. Please do not allow students to upload protected health information for patients. However, this can be a great place to add any ECGs or forms, such as agency confidentiality agreements. For many students, there will be no required documents to upload. After reviewing the documents, click the Complete tab in the menu on the left.
In this final section, you can approve documentation if it was completed correctly by the student. You can also reject it if a student documented a shift that was not actually attended. If corrections are needed, you can return this to the student. For example, if you thought a student's performance was marginal or unsuccessful, but the student documented a successful skill, you can return this to the student to change. If the student documented everything accurately, click Approve. You can add comments in the Message to Instructor text box, which will be emailed immediately to the instructors for the course.
If the documentation has been completed properly, you should not see any reports under the Ready to Review tab. You can review old documentation under the Completed tab. In summary, be sure you verify the information submitted by the student. You are certifying that the documentation is accurate and that the student performed all documented interventions under your direct supervision. Do not sign documentation that is not complete. If using paper documentation, you should mark through any blank spaces, assuring that the documentation cannot be altered. Paramedic programs are required by the National Registry of EMTs to have a process for preceptors to submit documentation securely and directly to the program. Students should document all skills and patient contacts throughout the shift, and complete final summary evaluations at the end. This enables accurate documentation and documented improvement of student performance throughout the shift. Remember that we are measuring student performance at the entry-level competency standard, not based on whether or not students perform at your level. Students earn a seat at the professional table if their performance is safe, effective, appropriate, and timely.
On behalf of the EMS program directors, medical directors, clinical coordinators, EMS coordinators, training officers, students, and staff of the Odemsa region, we want to thank you for your professionalism and dedication to EMS education. Each of us can credit much of our success to quality preceptors who mentored us during our educational program. It is now our opportunity to give back, and to produce high-quality professionals who will follow behind us. You have an opportunity to set an example and positively impact countless patients through the mentorship of the next generation of healthcare professionals. We could not do this without you. You are a valuable part, and perhaps the most valuable part, of the educational process. Thank you for taking the time to review this presentation. We hope you found it helpful in your role as a preceptor.